Every 10 years, the census takers knock on front doors across America to find out who we are and where we're going. The 1920 census told us that for the first time, we were almost equally spread between our great cities and life on the land. Lots of us were living in small towns, and small towns were changing too. The Great War was over, and many doughboys back from France were still adjusting to peace and the new prosperity. For those in farming communities, there were new problems. The Great Plains had been plowed up to raise wheat for the armies fighting the war. But with peace came the evaporation of the market which had made the farmer so prosperous. The lack of demand for wheat and other staple crops caused depression for the farmers. The new prosperity was based more on the sale of automobiles, radios, and electricity than on agriculture. Mechanization had helped the farmer. It made the work easier, but it also meant that fewer hands were needed. The farmers were disenchanted and afraid, and they campaigned without success for federal aid. For hundreds of thousands, the solution would mean leaving a life which had become a thankless occupation. Many would be drawn to the city by the glittering promise of prosperity, for the city was the loom that was weaving the new fabric of society. Much of the prosperity of the decade was produced by the automobile. Millions were made and sold. Car sales stimulated other industries as well, for cars meant gas, and gas meant oil, and rubber, glass, and steel. When we had a good idea, mass production multiplied it by millions. Business was the religion of the 20s. Machinery is the new messiah, Henry Ford told us. Calvin Coolidge agreed. The man who builds a factory builds a temple, Coolidge said, and the man who works there worships there. The new uniform of the decade was the business suit, and for the first time, millions of men bought them, not from the tailor, but right off the rack. Dressing right meant business success, and in the 20s, no professional was more greatly admired than the businessman. Businessmen were builders, doers of great things, men of vision with their eyes on the future. Millions of businessmen joined service clubs like Rotary and Kiwanis. These were men who were quite sure that strength of character could be measured by a handshake. What mattered to many women was the right to vote. The 19th Amendment guaranteed that right and was the law of the land as the 20s began. Though women in some western states had been voting for years, most American women cast their ballots in 1920 for the first time. Women also ran for office. First woman governor was elected in 1924. A few women had unusual occupations, like directing traffic as policewomen in New York City. Though some would become doctors and lawyers, most women who went to work in the 20s worked in laundries, bakeries, or in other blue-collar jobs. If you lived in a city, you might get a job as a telephone operator, a clerk, or a stenographer. Despite the reputation that all women in the 20s were flappers with newfound freedoms, most women had traditional roles, which included grocery shopping. In the 20s, millions of women fed their families with food from the Piggly Wiggly, or the A&P. Chain stores were spreading across the country with standard products on their shelves. You could buy the same brand of cornflakes, cookies in Iowa as your Aunt Clara did in New York. There were lots of products to choose from, and manufacturers spent millions on ads that told us which to buy. appeal of ads was irresistible. We bought things that promised to make life easier and more comfortable, and with satisfaction guaranteed. We bought things that showed we were successful and had good taste. In the 20s, we thought it was important to be modern. We saw these ads in magazines, in the pages of Life, Saturday Evening Post, and dozens more that were delivered to our door. We may not have been able to buy everything we saw, but we could dream. The magazines were cheap, and it was from their pages that the growing middle class built its image of itself, an image of prosperity. For most middle-class families, prosperity meant radios, automobiles, and telephones, for these were the things that meant convenience to the modern family. Almost every family had a car, and 3 out of 4 bought their cars on the installment plan. Used cars were sold too. The first car many families bought was second-hand. By the end of the decade, there were 26 million cars and trucks on American roads. If you lived in one of the new suburbs, you might use your car to drive to work or to visit friends on Sunday afternoon. Gasoline was still only 25 cents a gallon. And we used a lot of it, especially in the cities. City streets were crowded as never before. We were fast becoming a nation on wheels.
Well, as I told you before, Daph's school was just that little bit busier than mine. Lots and lots of extras. Learning to be a beautiful and useful lady. Needlework, dressmaking, petit point. It looked as though she'd be covered with handiwork before she was done. But joking aside, it was quite a smashing curriculum. They even had a horticultural class, with Daph and her chum simply hurling the flower pots around like billy-o. Some of them were real swats. But the emphasis was on games. I suppose they felt that a girl ought to have a few muscles to give her a head start in life. But as I always say, it depends on whom you're running from. Or to. Worth of Paris in 1924 said, "Women's fondness for sport fixes the present severe contour." Well, the contours were certainly different. One had to admit that. Freer, you might say. But if you wanted to have the boyish figure that was getting to be the rage, to be hipless and bustless, try a couple of terms at St. Winnie's. They'd fine you down there properly. Steady, girls, don't overdo it. But the best time for all of us was breaking up for the halls. Daph used to pass her summer holidays with the sea guides, or whatever they called them. After all, you never knew when knowing how to use a breeches buoy might not come in useful in later life. But not for Daph's sister such simple pleasures. She was off to Deauville to catch up with the sun. Deauville in the 20s. Pretty smart stuff today, but will it ever be again what it was then? Quite another world, really. Then the races, with the best of France rivaling the best of all Europe in who could look the smartest and who could draw the attention of the most millionaires. The showplace for all the fashion houses of Paris, where to be seen in yesterday's old rags just wasn't done. Yes, Deauville was the kind of place where dappers could learn in one day more than she could in a whole term at St. Winnie's. Oh, I didn't mean maths or stinks. Even at Deauville, the same emphasis on keeping slim and maintaining the flat look. Physical training to get down those curves and achieve a chest like the front of a tram car. That was the target. Hard work to become flat both in front and behind. That was the motto for young and old, the light and the heavy. Terribly good for you too, I suppose.
faces, friends, places, years and moments half forgotten, laughs, fears, songs, tears, memories are made of this. I remember a time of civvies mingled still with khaki, of great unveilings. 1920, when, on 100 freshly blooded battlefields, marshals and generals and brass hats laid enough stones to build a fair-sized house. While in 1,000 cities and villages across long-suffering Europe, other VIPs pulled away flags from great war obelisks, great war plaques, and great war cenotaphs, stones symbolizing flesh and blood, memorials for those to be remembered. Heaven knows there were enough of them to remember. Millions, the flower of nations, whole generations that, if things had been different, might have lived for greater and bigger things. The time when those who had just missed lying there with fathers and elder brothers could look forward at last to a life free from battle and sudden death. And how they did look forward and reveled in the looking forward. It was indeed the time of the plunge into peace.
Why am I dressed in these beautiful clothes? What is the matter with me? I've been a bridesmaid for 22 brides. This one will make 23. 22 maidens I've helped off the shelf. No doubt it seems a bit strange being the bridesmaid.
I remember in 1920 hearing Lily Morris sing a song rather appropriate to the plunge, I thought.
Why am I always the bridesmaid, never the blushing bride? Ding dong, wedding bells only ring for other girls, but one fine day, oh, let it be soon, I shall wake up in the morning on my own honeymoon.
I remember somebody called Beatrice Lilly being given away in marriage to a Lord Peel. Quite a show it made for the British glossy magazines. Well-known actress weds peer. Then there was a handsome, much sought-after boxer named Carpentier. He's Frenchman. Yes, weddings were the rage. Weddings and garden parties and dressy affairs after 4 years of drab and khaki. Plunge into peace. Back into pageantry and full-dress ceremonial. Hang out the flags and the bunting. In Britain, troop the colour once more with red and black and shining accoutrements. This kind of soldiering was a great deal better than the other kind. This kind was just showmanship. Plunge into peace. If you were in Britain, you dolled up in your best for Royal Ascot or Lord's and the Eton and Harrow, toppers and the lot. And when you've stopped looking at each other and finished with eating, drinking and meeting your friends, who knows, maybe you'd find time to watch the cricket. Then Henley. There, too, the racing really took second place to other and more important things, such as doffing your bolter to the Prince of Wales. And if you were lucky, you might even shake him by the hand or sit with him in that holy of holies, the umpire's launch. Picnics on the river, watercress sandwiches, wasps, and tea out of those flask things that keep it hot, even if sometimes it did taste a bit of the cork. Yes, all this was a lot better than Ypres, the Somme, or the Argonne, even in their better moments. Better than shells and dugouts and bully beef. And although sometimes it didn't feel quite the same as it had done before the war, you know, like a hat you've put aside only to find later that it doesn't quite fit you as it did. Yet it was all very delightful. But even in all the forgetting, there was some poignant remembering. That year, across the channel from France, came a warship with escort, its white ensign at half-mast. On her decks, a flower-covered coffin. Who he was, no one knew. That was the idea. An idea that inspired other nations, too, to select their own unknown warrior. On Armistice Day in London, the great marched with the gun carriage, with a poor, shattered body, chosen at random. Unrecognized, maybe unrecognizable. In Whitehall, King George V, his sons and his ministers paid their respects in one more unveiling, this time of a memorial to one mighty host to be remembered, the cenotaph. That's Lloyd George. Tinker, tailor, soldier for certain, but rich man, poor man, beggar man, or thief. Poor broken warrior. Whatever he was in life, in death, he was the greatest of them all. The late enemy was in his place, back over the Rhine, and French, Belgian, and British forces marched into his streets to ensure that he remained there. Germany was at the start of close on a decade of Allied occupation. There, thousands of fighting aircraft, guns, and other weapons came under the sledgehammers of the junkyards. Germany's power to make war or even defend herself was going into scrap, supposedly forever. But there was some forgiving, too. A new German ambassador arrived in London. After 6 years, normal diplomatic relations were at last resumed. Mark you, the deposed Kaiser was still considered fair game. A model of His Imperial Highness was made to work in a lifelike manner by means of light beams. But no light beams could influence the movements of the new regime in what was now Soviet Russia. There had been some military attempts to put Lenin and his followers into their place, but they'd come to naught. And at a conference of Allied leaders in Britain, Lloyd George and the rest decided that in the little matter of a war that was raging between Poland and the new Colossus, the Poles must go it alone. Small wars must be ignored in the general pattern of peacemaking. In the courtyard of London's St. James's Palace, diplomats came and went as the nations decided the shape and form of a new international organization. Its title, the League of Nations. Among the top-hatted British, French, Italian, and Japanese, no Americans were to be seen. In spite of President Wilson's dreams, the United States had decided to keep out of Europe's future affairs. A decision to prove, in the long run, not only a pity, but a disaster. Plunge into peace, and the politics of peace. 1920. I remember all the excitement when into a British port sailed a couple that all the world seemed crazy to meet. Idols of the silver screen have always provided a great attraction, but no subsequent display of fan worship has ever quite come up to what those two received. A golden-haired little Hollywood actress and her romantic, acrobatic husband. Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks. Douglas Senior, to be exact. London, Paris, every European capital was their oyster. And wherever they went, it was flowers and general hysteria. In such a new medium as the cinema was then, these two were the first real stars in the whole bright firmament. The world's sweetheart, they called her. And to many, Mary Pickford personified that whole first generation of really free women ready to do any man's job, and maybe even do it better. Already those who had worked the fields and factories during the recent war were seeking fresh pastures in mass emigrations to Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Already there were women lawyers, women doctors, and even women dentists. Training like beavers they were to wrench the molars from the Allied forces of occupation. I tell you, it took pluck to guard the Rhineland in those days. Alice Delizia shocked some when she kicked off at a football match, but a few titters of disapproval couldn't stem such a tide. No, sir, or madam. Suddenly, on the sports fields, there were women centre-forwards, goalkeepers, right-backs, left-backs, and better halves. Women had spotted their goals and were now all out to get them. Gone with the wind of war were the ladies of Victorian and Edwardian England, the ladies that once would have bathed only when covered from head to toe. Now, the beaches of Britain were displaying, well, more than any respectable woman should. Splashing about as though in the privacy of their own bathrooms, the shameless hussies. Yes, women had their behinds in the saddle and their feet on the pedals, and there was no stopping them. In the race for superiority, men were hard-pressed even to catch up. And after the years of war, there seemed a lot of catching up to do. Only often it was a little difficult to decide on the best way of doing it. Someone tried to play the piano for over 100 hours, non-stop, unaccompanied, of course. Yes, in the throes of self-expression, quite a few went off the deep end.